My own son tried to have me declared mentally incompetent so he could steal my $22 million. And the only way I could escape his trap was by crawling through a bathroom window at 72 years old. Let me say that again, because I still can't believe it myself. My flesh and blood, the baby I carried for 9 months, the boy I raised, fed, and sacrificed everything for, filed legal papers claiming I was too crazy to control my own money. Papers that would have handed him everything I'd worked 60 years to build. "Mom, open this door right now," Brian's voice thundered through the bathroom door as I struggled with the window latch. "We know about the money. We know you've been lying to us." Lying, that's what they called it when I didn't hand over my life savings the moment they found out about it. That's what they called 5 decades of careful investing, smart choices, and living below my means, while they lived like kings off my generosity. Patricia's voice joined the chorus. "Eleanor, this is for your own good. You're not thinking clearly." Not thinking clearly, because apparently wanting to keep control of money I'd earned made me insane. Because saying no to my adult children made me incompetent. Because having the audacity to save money instead of spending every penny on their wants and dreams made me unfit to make my own decisions. I pushed the window open and looked down at the flower bed below. At 72, I was about to become a fugitive in my own life. But as I swung my leg over the sill, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Power. They thought they had me cornered. Thought they had it all figured out. They had no idea what was coming next. Before I tell you how this story ends, I need to know, are you listening to this while you're doing dishes? Driving to work? Taking a walk? Because if this story spreads the way I hope it will, if it reaches the people who need to hear it most, I want to know how far it traveled. Comment and tell me where you're hearing this right now. Let me take you back 5 years to when this whole nightmare began. That's when Brian and Patricia bought their dream house, a 4-bedroom colonial with granite countertops and a 3-car garage that cost more than I'd made in my entire career as a school cook. Of course, they couldn't quite afford the down payment on their own. "Mom, we just need a little help getting started," Brian had said, sitting at my kitchen table with those puppy dog eyes that had worked on me since he was 7. "It's an investment in our future. Abigail needs good schools, and this neighborhood has the best district in the county." So I wrote them a check for $40,000. Not a loan, a gift. Because that's what mothers do, right? We sacrifice so our children can have better lives than we did. What I didn't tell them was that $40,000 was pocket change to me. While they saw their mother scraping by on a school cook's pension, living in my modest 2-bedroom house with the same furniture I'd had for 20 years, I was quietly sitting on a fortune that would have shocked them speechless. You see, I'd been investing since I was 25 years old. Every month, I took half my paycheck from the school kitchen and bought stocks. Nothing fancy, just solid companies that made products people actually needed. While my coworkers spent their money on new cars and vacations, I drove my Honda until the wheels fell off and took my holidays in my own backyard. But the real windfall had come 3 years ago, when Mrs. Henderson, the principal I'd worked under for 30 years, passed away. Sweet woman, never married, no children. She'd watched me work 2 jobs to put Brian through college, while his father ran off with his secretary. She'd seen me skip meals so I could send Brian money for textbooks and car repairs. Mrs. Henderson left me everything. $2 million plus her house, which I sold for another $800,000. Combined with my own investments and savings, I was worth $22 million. $22 million. And my family had no idea. They saw me as their personal ATM and maid service, and I let them. Every Sunday, I'd drive the 45 minutes to their house with a trunk full of groceries and a cooler packed with meals I'd spent Saturday preparing. Pot roast, casseroles, Brian's favorite chocolate chip cookies. I'd spend the day cleaning their kitchen, doing their laundry, watching Abigail while they ran errands or went out with friends. "Mom, you're a lifesaver," Patricia would say, not even looking up from her phone as I scrubbed their bathrooms. "I don't know what we'd do without you." What they'd do was hire a housekeeper and a nanny, like other families with their income level. But why pay for help when they had me? The pattern was always the same. I'd arrive Sunday morning, work like a dog all day, then sit down to a dinner where they'd casually mention their latest financial crisis. Car repairs, credit card bills, Abigail's dance lessons, always something that required an immediate cash injection from good old Mom. And I always said yes, not because I couldn't afford to say no, but because I thought I was helping. I thought I was being a good mother. I thought family was supposed to take care of each other. My former principal's will had left me more than comfortable. I could have bought a mansion, traveled the world, hired my own staff. Instead, I was subsidizing my son's lifestyle while he treated me like the hired help. The breaking point came last Thanksgiving. I'd spent 3 days preparing the meal: turkey, stuffing, cranberry sauce made from scratch, 4 different pies, 26 dishes total, enough to feed their extended family and friends. I'd even bought new china because Patricia mentioned their old set was embarrassing for entertaining. I was in their kitchen, washing the dishes from the meal I'd cooked in the house I'd helped them buy, when I overheard Brian talking to his friend Mark in the living room. "Yeah, Mom takes care of everything," he was saying. "Cooking, cleaning, babysitting. It's like having live-in help, except she pays us instead of the other way around." They both laughed. My hands froze in the soapy water. Live-in help that paid them. That's how my own son saw me. But it was Patricia's response that really cut deep. She'd wandered into the kitchen as I was putting away the last of the dishes, and she had that look on her face, the one she got when she was about to ask for another favor. "Eleanor, I've been thinking," she said, not even offering to help dry the dishes. "Abigail's going to need college money soon, and with tuition costs these days, well, you know how it is. Brian and I were hoping you could start setting aside some money each month. Maybe $500. I know it's a lot for someone on a fixed income, but we're really counting on family to help out. $500 a month for college," while she stood there in designer jeans that cost more than I spent on clothes in a year. "And another thing," she continued, examining her manicured nails. "We're thinking about Europe this summer. Paris, maybe Rome. We deserve a real vacation after working so hard this year. But it's expensive, obviously. If you could help with just a few thousand, we'd pay you back eventually." Eventually, like the $40,000 for the house down payment that had somehow transformed from a loan into a gift when I gently asked about repayment 6 months later. I dried my hands slowly, looking at this woman who lived in luxury funded by my generosity, asking me to bankroll her vacation while I stood in her kitchen cleaning up after her friends. "Mom, you don't understand money like we do," Brian said, appearing in the doorway with that condescending smile I'd grown to hate. "You've always been conservative with spending, but sometimes you have to invest in experiences, in your family's future. Trust us, we know how to make money work." Trust them. With what money? The pension they assumed was my only income? The social security they figured was barely keeping me afloat? If only they knew that their poor old mom could have bought them 10 European vacations without even touching the principal on her investments. That night, driving home to my little house, with the hand-me-down furniture and the 10-year-old television, I made a decision. I was done being their ATM. I was done being their maid. I was done being invisible in my own son's life, except when they needed something. But I had no idea that decision would almost destroy me. The truth has a funny way of coming out when you least expect it. For me, it happened on a Tuesday morning in March, in the most mundane way possible, a heart palpitation that landed me in the emergency room at St. Mary's Hospital. It wasn't serious, thank God, just stress and too much caffeine, the doctor said. But when they asked for my insurance information and medical history, I had to list my assets for the financial aid office. Standard procedure, they told me, just in case. I should have been more careful. I should have thought about who they might call in case of emergency. But when you're lying on a hospital gurney with wires attached to your chest, you don't think about protecting secrets you've kept for years. Brian arrived within an hour, still in his work clothes, looking genuinely worried. For a moment, I felt that old maternal warmth. My son, rushing to my bedside, caring about my well-being. "How are you feeling, Mom?" he asked, taking my hand. "They said it was your heart?" "I'm fine, sweetheart. Just a scare. Too much worry, not enough sleep." He stayed with me through the discharge process, helping me fill out paperwork, talking to the nurses. Model son behavior. I was actually touched by his attention. Until the financial counselor handed him my insurance forms. Brian's face went white when he saw those bank statements. His eyes moved across the page like he was reading a foreign language, his mouth opening and closing without sound. "Mom," he said slowly, his voice barely above a whisper, "what is this?" I looked at the paper in his trembling hands. There it was, in black and white. Eleanor Matthews, total assets, $22,247,386. It's my financial information, Brian, for the hospital. $22 million, his voice cracked. $22 million? How is that possible? The drive home was silent, except for the sound of Brian's breathing, which seemed to get heavier with each mile. I could practically hear the wheels turning in his head, calculating how long I'd been hiding this from him, how many times he'd asked me for money, while thinking I was barely scraping by. When we pulled into his driveway, not mine, his, because apparently we needed to talk about this immediately, Patricia was already waiting on the front porch. Brian had called her from the hospital parking lot. "Eleanor," she said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "How are you feeling? Brian told me about your little health scare." Little health scare. She made it sound like a hangnail, but I could see the real focus in her eyes. She wasn't looking at me like a concerned daughter-in-law checking on an elderly relative's health. She was looking at me like I was a winning lottery ticket that had been hiding in her purse all along. We sat in their living room, the living room I'd helped them afford, while they stared at me like I'd grown a second head. $22 million, Patricia said, shaking her head. "All this time we thought you needed our help. All those times you let us pay for dinner because you said you were on a fixed income. All those times we worried about how you were getting by." Worried, right. That's why they'd asked me for money practically every month for the past 5 years. "Mom, we need to talk about this," Brian said, leaning forward in his chair. "Hiding money like this, it's not normal. We're your family. We should have known." "Should have known what exactly?" I asked, keeping my voice calm even though my heart was starting to race again. "Should have known that our mother is a millionaire," Patricia exploded, all pretense of sweetness gone. "Do you know what we could have done with that money? Abigail could have gone to private school. We could have bought a better house, in a better neighborhood. We could have—" "You could have what?" I interrupted. "Spent my money instead of your own?" The words hung in the air like a slap. Patricia's face flushed red, and Brian looked like I'd just cursed in church. "That's not what this is about," Brian said, but his tone had changed. Gone was the concerned son. In his place was someone I didn't recognize, someone calculating and cold. This is about family responsibility, about sharing resources, about not letting your loved ones struggle while you sit on a fortune. Struggle. I looked around their perfectly appointed living room, at the 75-inch television mounted on the wall, at Patricia's designer handbag sitting on the marble coffee table, at the family photos displayed in silver frames that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. What struggle, Brian? Help me understand what kind of struggle you're experiencing in your 4-bedroom house with your 3-car garage and your annual trips to Cancun. That's not the point, Patricia snapped. The point is that you lied to us. The point is that you've been playing some sick game, pretending to be poor while you what? Took advantage of me? Used me as free labor? Treated me like your personal bank account? The silence that followed was deafening. You know what? Brian said finally, standing up and pacing to the window. I think the stress of hiding this money might be affecting your judgment, Mom. Normal people don't hoard wealth like this. Normal people don't lie to their families for years. Normal people share their good fortune with the people they love. There it was, the first hint of what was coming. What are you saying, Brian? I'm saying maybe we need to have you evaluated, professionally, because hiding $22 million from your family while watching them worry about money, that's not rational behavior. My blood ran cold. Evaluated? Patricia jumped in, her voice suddenly gentle again. We're just concerned about you, Eleanor. This kind of secretive behavior, this hoarding, it could be a sign of cognitive decline, early dementia maybe. We've read about how these things can affect decision-making, dementia. They were calling me crazy for not giving them my money. There's nothing wrong with my mind, I said quietly. Maybe not, Brian said, but his tone suggested otherwise. But we can't ignore this kind of erratic behavior. Hiding money, lying to family, making poor financial decisions. What poor financial decisions? I've made excellent financial decisions. That's how I accumulated this wealth in the first place. Accumulating money you never spend isn't a good financial decision, Mom. It's hoarding, it's selfish, and it's not fair to the people who love you. Before I could respond, the front door opened and Frank walked in without knocking. My older brother, who I hadn't seen in 6 months, suddenly showing up at the exact moment my family discovered my wealth. What a coincidence. Eleanor, he said, not even pretending to be surprised to see me there. Brian called me. We need to talk. Brian had called him. Of course he had. Frank sat down across from me, his expression serious. I've been doing some research about situations like this, about elderly people who make questionable financial decisions, about family obligations and legal remedies. Legal remedies. My own brother was talking about legal remedies. Frank, there's nothing questionable about my financial decisions. I've been responsible with money my entire life. Responsible? He pulled out a folder he'd obviously prepared in advance. Eleanor, you've been living like a pauper while sitting on a fortune. You've let your family struggle financially while you hoarded wealth. That's not responsible. That's pathological. The word hit me like a physical blow. Pathological. In some states, Frank continued, opening his folder, family members can petition for guardianship when an elderly relative demonstrates signs of financial incompetence or hoarding behaviors. It's a legal protection for seniors who might not be thinking clearly. There it was, the threat laid out in plain terms. You're talking about having me declared incompetent, I said, my voice steady despite the panic rising in my chest. We're talking about protecting you, Patricia said, and protecting the family's interests. This money should be shared, Eleanor. It should be used to benefit everyone, not just sitting in some bank account while your granddaughter can't afford college and your son can't afford to give her the life she deserves. I looked at the three faces staring at me, my son, my daughter-in-law, and my brother. People I'd loved, trusted, sacrificed for. People who were now talking about taking away my legal rights because I hadn't handed over my life savings on demand. Frank had researched guardianship laws before he even called me. This wasn't a spontaneous family meeting about my health scare. This was a coordinated attack, planned and executed while I was lying in a hospital bed with heart monitors attached to my chest. "So what exactly are you proposing?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. Brian exchanged a look with Patricia before speaking. "We think you should share the wealth immediately. Set up trust funds for Abigail, help us pay off our mortgage, maybe invest in some family businesses. And we think you should do it voluntarily, before we have to involve the courts." Before they had to involve the courts, the threat couldn't have been clearer. I stood up slowly, my legs surprisingly steady despite everything that had just happened. "I see. And if I refuse?" Frank closed his folder and looked at me with what he probably thought was compassion. "Then we'll have to explore other options. For your own good, Eleanor. For the good of the family." As I walked to my car that evening, leaving them to their plotting and planning, one thought kept running through my mind. They had no idea who they were dealing with. They saw a fragile old woman they could intimidate and manipulate. They were about to learn just how wrong they were. The official court documents arrived on a Friday morning, delivered by a man in a crisp uniform who apologized for disturbing me so early. I signed for the envelope with hands that didn't shake, thanked him politely, and closed the door before my knees gave out. Petition for emergency guardianship of Eleanor Matthews, age 72, by Brian Matthews, son and primary caregiver. Primary caregiver. The man who saw me twice a month when he needed something was now my primary caregiver. I sat at my kitchen table, the same table where I'd written dozens of checks said to help this family over the years, and read through the legal papers that would strip away every right that I'd spent 7 decades earning. The petition was thorough, I'll give them that. Brian and his lawyer had done their homework. According to the document, I suffered from financial hoarding behaviors consistent with early-stage dementia. I exhibited paranoid ideation regarding family members. I demonstrated poor judgment in financial planning and asset management. But the part that really took my breath away was this: Mrs. Matthews has accumulated excessive wealth of approximately $22 million, while denying herself and her family basic comforts and necessities, indicating severe cognitive impairment and inability to make rational financial decisions. They were claiming that being wealthy made me incompetent, that saving money was evidence of mental illness, that not spending every penny I earned on their wants and wishes proved I was unfit to control my own life. The hearing was scheduled for 2 weeks from that Friday, 14 days for them to present evidence of my mental decline, 14 days for me to prove I was still capable of managing my own affairs. I was still absorbing the shock when my phone rang. "Eleanor, it's Patricia. I hope you got our message yesterday. We've set up an appointment for you with Dr. Martinez this afternoon. Just a routine checkup, nothing to worry about." A routine checkup on a Friday afternoon with a doctor I'd never heard of. "I don't need a checkup, Patricia. I just saw Dr. Wilson last month." Well, Dr. Martinez specializes in geriatric medicine. Brian thought it would be good to get a second opinion, especially after your episode at the hospital. You know how stress can affect cognitive function in people your age. Cognitive function. There was that phrase again. "What time is this appointment?" 3 o'clock. Brian will pick you up at 2:30. Wear something nice. Dr. Martinez works at a very professional practice. Something nice, like I was going to a job interview instead of what I now realized was a psychiatric evaluation designed to prove I was incompetent. I'll drive myself, thank you. Oh, but Eleanor, you shouldn't be driving when you're feeling confused. What if you get lost? What if you have another episode? Brian insists on taking you. Confused. Episode. They'd already decided what story they were going to tell. I hung up and immediately called Dr. Martinez's office. The receptionist was very helpful. Oh yes, Mrs. Matthews, your son scheduled a comprehensive geriatric assessment. Dr. Martinez will be conducting cognitive function tests, memory evaluations, and financial competency screenings. The full battery takes about 3 hours. Financial competency screenings. 3 hours of tests designed to prove I couldn't handle my own money. And who requested these specific tests? Your son, Mr. Matthews. He was quite concerned about some behavioral changes he's noticed. Very caring family member, very thorough. He even provided Dr. Martinez with a detailed list of concerning incidents. A detailed list. They'd been documenting my mental decline for weeks, maybe months. Building a case while I thought we were just having family disagreements. I hung up and sat in my kitchen, staring at the court papers and feeling more alone than I had since my husband died 15 years ago. My own family had turned against me, and they were using the legal system to do it. They had lawyers, doctors, documentation. They had a plan. What did I have? Then I remembered Robert. Robert Chen and I had worked together at Lincoln Elementary for almost 30 years. He'd been the school's guidance counselor while I ran the kitchen, and we'd become friends over countless cups of coffee in the faculty lounge. He'd retired the same year I did, and we'd kept in touch through holiday cards and the occasional phone call. I'd always known Robert was smart. He had degrees hanging on his office wall, spoke 3 languages, and could explain complicated things in ways that made sense. But I'd never really asked what he did before becoming a school counselor. I found his number in my address book and dialed before I could lose my nerve. Eleanor, what a wonderful surprise. How are you doing? Robert, I need help. I'm in trouble and I don't know who else to call. His tone changed immediately. What kind of trouble? Are you safe? I'm safe for now, but my family is trying to have me declared incompetent. They want to take control of my money, and they've filed papers with the court. I have a hearing in 2 weeks, and they're sending me to some doctor this afternoon to build their case. There was a long pause. When Robert spoke again, his voice was different, more professional, more focused. Eleanor, I need you to listen to me very carefully. Do not go to that doctor's appointment. Do not sign anything. Do not answer any questions about your finances or your mental state. Can you meet me somewhere private where we can talk? Yes, but Robert, I don't understand how you can help. Eleanor, he said gently, I wasn't always a school counselor. Before I went into education, I practiced law for 25 years. Estate planning, elder law, guardianship cases. I know exactly what your family is trying to do, and I know how to stop them. I nearly dropped the phone. Robert was a lawyer. All these years, I'd been sharing coffee and cafeteria complaints with someone who could have helped me with legal problems I never even knew I had. Can you meet me at Miller's Diner on Highway 9, the one by the old Sears? I can be there in an hour. Robert, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. They have court papers. They have a doctor ready to declare me incompetent. They've been planning this for weeks. And you have something they don't expect, Eleanor. You have me. After I hung up, I looked around my little kitchen one more time, at the court papers scattered on the table, at the phone where my daughter-in-law had just tried to trick me into a psychiatric evaluation, at the walls where my husband's pictures still hung after 15 years. In 2 hours, I was supposed to let my son drive me to a doctor who would ask if I knew what year it was, if I could count backwards from 100, if I understood the value of money. A doctor who would write a report saying that a woman who turned $40,000 into $22 million over the course of 50 years was too incompetent to manage her own checkbook. But my family had made one crucial mistake in their carefully laid plan. They'd assumed I was just a helpless old woman with no resources and no friends. They were about to learn that their crazy mother had been sharing coffee with a retired attorney for 30 years, and that attorney was very interested in their little guardianship scheme. As I grabbed my purse and headed for the door, I felt something I hadn't felt since this nightmare began. Hope. Not just hope, but excitement. My family thought they had me cornered, but the game was far from over. Miller's Diner hadn't changed in 20 years. Same red vinyl booths, same checkered floor, same smell of coffee and bacon that took me back to simpler times. I found Robert in a corner booth, wearing a navy suit that reminded me he'd lived a whole different life before we became friends over cafeteria duty. He stood up when he saw me, and for the first time in weeks, someone looked at me like I was a person instead of a problem to be solved. "Eleanor," he said, taking my hands, "are you okay?" "I'm terrified," I admitted, "but I'm also angry, angrier than I've ever been in my life." "Good. Anger is useful in cases like this. It keeps you focused." He gestured for me to sit down. "Now tell me everything. Start from the beginning." So I did. I told him about the hospital, about the family meeting, about Frank's folder, and Patricia's fake concern. I showed him the court papers and watched his expression grow darker with each page. "This is textbook elder financial abuse," he said when I finished. "They're using the guardianship system as a weapon to steal your assets. The good news is that it's also completely illegitimate." He pulled out a legal pad and started making notes. "Eleanor, I need you to understand something. What they're attempting is not just morally wrong, it's legally fraudulent. Guardianship is supposed to protect vulnerable seniors, not enable family members to loot their bank accounts. But they have a lawyer, they have court papers. They're making it all look official. And we're going to make it look very unofficial very quickly." Robert's pen moved across the page. "First, we need to document your mental competency, not with some biased doctor your son hired, but with independent medical professionals. I know several geriatricians who specialize in competency evaluations." He looked up from his notes. "Eleanor, your family is operating under the assumption that you're a helpless old woman who doesn't understand the legal system. Are you prepared to prove them wrong?" For the first time in weeks, I smiled, very prepared. We spent the next 2 hours building our case. Robert explained that proving mental competency wasn't just about passing cognitive tests. It was about demonstrating sound financial judgment over time. And my investment portfolio, he said, was a masterclass in financial wisdom. "Let me get this straight," he said, reviewing the documents I'd brought. "You turned a school cook's salary into $22 million over 50 years through careful investing and disciplined spending?" "Yes." "You never missed a payment on any bill, never defaulted on any loan, never made any risky financial decisions?" "Correct." "And your family is claiming this proves you're mentally incompetent?" "Apparently so," Robert started laughing. Not a polite chuckle, but genuine laughter that made other customers turn to look at us. "Eleanor, do you know what most financial advisors would call someone who achieved your level of investment success? A genius. Your son's lawyer is essentially arguing that being a financial genius is evidence of dementia." But even as relief flooded through me, Robert's expression grew serious again. However, we can't just show up to court and expect the judge to take our word for it. Guardianship cases are emotional, and families can be very convincing when they claim they're protecting a loved one. We need overwhelming evidence that this petition is fraudulent. That's when Robert told me something that changed everything. I've seen cases like this before, Eleanor. The family usually reveals their true intentions when they think they're winning. If you can get them to admit their real motivations on record, it would destroy their case completely. How would I do that? You're going to give them exactly what they want to hear. You're going to appear confused, compliant, ready to cooperate, and you're going to record every word they say. Robert reached into his briefcase and pulled out a small digital recorder, no bigger than a smartphone. This is completely legal in our state, as long as one party to the conversation consents to recording. That's you. Your family won't know they're being recorded, but everything they say will be admissible in court. My hands trembled slightly as I took the device. What if they find it? They won't. It looks like a phone, and it has 8 hours of recording capacity. But Eleanor, I need you to understand, once we start this, there's a no going back. Are you prepared for your family to know that you fought back? I thought about Brian's condescending smile when he told me I didn't understand money, about Patricia's casual demands for vacation funding, about Frank's folder full of research on how to steal my independence. I'm more than prepared. Robert outlined the plan. I would go home and act like nothing had changed. I would call Brian and apologize for missing the doctor's appointment, maybe even suggest rescheduling. I would seem confused about the court papers, ask for their help understanding what was happening. Let them think they're winning, Robert said. Let them get comfortable. People say the most revealing things when they think they're safe. We scheduled a follow-up meeting for Monday, and Robert gave me his direct number. As I prepared to leave, he handed me a business card. Chen and Associates, elder law specialists, I read aloud. I may have retired from school counseling, but I never stopped practicing law. I just moved to a smaller firm that specializes in cases like yours. He smiled. Eleanor, your family picked a fight with the wrong little old lady. That evening, I called Brian from my kitchen phone, the recorder lying on the table next to me like a sleeping weapon. Mom, where were you today? Dr. Martinez waited for over an hour. Oh, Brian, I'm so sorry. I got confused about the time, and then I was afraid to drive because I felt dizzy. I made my voice sound small, uncertain. I feel terrible about missing it. That's exactly what we're worried about, Mom. This kind of confusion, forgetting appointments. It's getting worse, isn't it? I suppose it might be. Everything seems so complicated lately. These court papers, they're so confusing. I don't understand what they mean. Brian's tone became more patient, more condescending. They're just to help you, Mom. To make sure someone responsible is looking after your finances. You don't need to worry about complicated things like investments and bank accounts anymore. But it's my money, Brian. I worked for it. I know you did, and now it's time to let other people worry about managing it for you. People who understand these things better. I let my voice crack slightly. You really think I'm not capable anymore? Mom, hiding $22 million isn't normal. Normal people don't live like paupers when they could be enjoying their wealth. Normal people share their good fortune with their families. Share their good fortune, as if my money was community property that I'd been selfishly hoarding. Maybe you're right, I said quietly. Maybe I haven't been thinking clearly. That's why we're here to help. Tomorrow night, why don't you come over for dinner? Patricia's making your favorite pot roast. We can all sit down and figure out how to handle this situation together, as a family. That sounds nice, Brian. I'd like that. After I hung up, I sat in my kitchen holding that small recorder, knowing that in 24 hours I would be sitting at their dinner table with a weapon they couldn't see. A weapon that would capture every word of their real intentions. I spent that Saturday doing something I hadn't done in months. I pampered myself. I got my hair done, bought a new dress, even got a manicure. If this was going to be my last performance as the confused, helpless mother, I was going to look good doing it. But as I was getting ready for dinner Sunday evening, I discovered something that made my blood run cold. Patricia had 3 maxed-out credit cards she'd hidden from Brian. I found the statements in her purse when I was helping her in the kitchen. Statement showing over $80,000 in debt. Shopping sprees, spa treatments, expensive dinners. All while she'd been lecturing me about financial responsibility. No wonder they were so desperate for my money. They weren't just greedy, they were broke. As I helped Patricia set the table with the china I'd bought them, I realized this wasn't just about wanting my wealth. This was about needing it to save themselves from financial ruin. And that made them infinitely more dangerous. I smiled and nodded while copying every document they'd forged, every piece of evidence they thought supported their case. But more importantly, I was about to record a conversation that would reveal the true scope of their desperation. They had no idea that their confused mother was about to document their confession to attempted elder financial abuse. The recorder in my purse felt warm against my leg as we sat down to eat. 8 hours of recording capacity, more than enough to capture every detail of their scheme. As Brian raised his wine glass for a toast to family and taking care of each other, I pressed the record button under the table. Let the games begin. The pot roast was delicious. Patricia had actually outdone herself. Tender meat, perfectly seasoned vegetables, homemade gravy that reminded me of Sunday dinners from my childhood. It would have been a lovely family meal if we weren't planning to destroy each other. "This is wonderful, Patricia," I said, taking another bite, while the recorder in my purse captured every sound. "You're such a good cook." "Well, I learned from the best," she replied with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Eleanor, we're so glad you're being reasonable about all this. It shows you're still thinking clearly about what's important." What's important, namely giving them access to my bank accounts. "I've been thinking about what you said, Brian, about sharing the wealth, about family, taking care of family." I made my voice sound uncertain, like I was struggling with a difficult decision. "Maybe you're right. Maybe I have been selfish." Brian and Patricia exchanged a look across the table. Frank, who'd arrived just as we started eating, nodded approvingly. "That's good, Eleanor. That's very good." Frank pulled out the same folder he'd brought to our first confrontation. "I've been working with Brian's lawyer on the best way to handle this transition." Transition, like I was a business being sold. "What kind of transition?" I asked, playing my part perfectly. "Well," Brian said, cutting into his meat with unnecessary precision, "we think the simplest approach is to set up a family trust. That way, the money is protected but accessible for everyone's needs." Everyone's needs. How generous of them to include me in everyone. "And how would that work exactly?" Patricia leaned forward, her voice taking on that patient tone people use with children and the elderly. "We'd handle all the complicated financial decisions for you. Investment choices, spending priorities, budget management. You wouldn't have to worry about any of it." "But what if I wanted to spend some of my own money?" "Of course you could spend money," Brian said quickly. "We'd set up an allowance, a monthly distribution, something reasonable for your living expenses." An allowance. They were planning to give me an allowance from my own fortune. How much would be reasonable? Frank consulted his folder. "We were thinking around $3,000 a month. That's more than enough for someone your age, especially since you won't have to worry about major expenses anymore. $3,000 a month from $22 million. They were planning to give me less than 1% of my own money to live on. And what about the rest? The other $21 million or so? That's where family planning comes in, Patricia said, her excitement barely contained. Abigail's college fund, obviously. Our mortgage could be paid off, which would free up money for other investments. Frank has some business opportunities that could really multiply the wealth. And of course, we'd want to enjoy some of it. Travel, nice cars, maybe a vacation home. I took a sip of wine and felt the recorder humming silently in my purse. Every word, every casual admission of their plans to loot my life savings was being preserved for posterity. That does sound like a lot of responsibility for you all to take on, I said. It is, Brian agreed solemnly. But that's what family does. We take care of each other. And if I said no, if I decided I wanted to keep managing my own money, the temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Mom, Brian said, his voice becoming firmer, we've already been through this. The court hearing is tomorrow. Dr. Martinez has submitted his report recommending guardianship based on your missed appointment and erratic behavior. You can make this easy on yourself, or you can make it difficult, but either way, the outcome is going to be the same. Dr. Martinez had submitted a report without ever meeting me. Based on a missed appointment, the corruption was breathtaking. Once we get guardianship, Patricia said, apparently forgetting to maintain the pretense that this was all for my benefit, we can fix all her mistakes, move the money into better investments, start using it the way it should have been used all along. Frank nodded. $22 million sitting in conservative investments is a waste. With proper management, we could double that in 5 years. And if we lose some of it? I asked innocently. We won't lose it, Mom, Brian said impatiently. We understand money better than you do. We understand how to make it work. They understood money so well that they'd racked up $80,000 in credit card debt while asking me for vacation funds. I suppose you're right, I said, reaching for my purse. I should probably use the restroom before we discuss this any further. In the bathroom, I checked the recorder, still running, still capturing. I had everything I needed, their admission that the doctor's report was fraudulent, their detailed plans for spending my money, their casual dismissal of my rights as a human being. But as I was washing my hands, I heard Brian's voice through the thin walls. She's being too compliant. This isn't like her. My blood froze. What do you mean? Patricia asked. Mom doesn't give up this easily. Yesterday she was arguing with us, and today she's ready to hand over everything? Something's not right. I heard footsteps moving through the house, searching footsteps. Frank, check her purse. See if she's got a recording device or something. They knew. Somehow they knew. I heard them dumping out my purse in the living room, heard the distinctive beep of the recorder being discovered. Son of a bitch, Frank's voice carried through the walls. She's been recording everything. How much did she get? Brian asked. The whole dinner by the looks of it. Maybe more. Where is she? Patricia's voice had gone from sweet to vicious in seconds. I heard them moving through the house, checking rooms, calling my name. They were between me and the front door. The back door was in the kitchen, which I'd have to pass through the living room to reach. That left one option. I looked at the bathroom window, small, high up, probably hadn't been opened in years. But it faced the backyard, and beyond that was the neighbor's property. If I could get through it, I could disappear into the subdivision before they knew which direction I'd gone. At 72, I was about to become a fugitive in my own son's house. The window fought me, paint and years of neglect making it stick. Behind me, I could hear them getting closer. Eleanor, Brian's voice was right outside the bathroom door now. "We need to talk about this. Come out here right now." The window finally gave way, with a screech of protest. Cool evening air rushed in, carrying the scent of Patricia's roses and the promise of freedom. "Mom, we know you're in there. Open this door." I hiked up my dress and swung one leg over the sill. The marigolds below looked very far away, but not as far as a courtroom where I'd be declared incompetent based on lies and forged medical reports. "Break down the door," I heard Frank say. That's when I dropped into the flower bed, my knees screaming in protest but holding my weight. By the time I heard the bathroom door splintering behind me, I was already running across the backyard in my good dress and sensible shoes, my cell phone clutched in my hand. The lights came on in Brian's house as I reached the neighbor's fence. I could hear shouting, could see figures moving frantically through the windows. But I was already dialing Robert's number as I made my way to the street. "Eleanor, where are you? You sound out of breath." "I'm about 2 blocks from Brian's house, and I'm in trouble. They found the recorder, but not before I got everything we need. Can you pick me up?" "I'm already in my car." "What's your exact location?" I gave him the address of a corner convenience store, a place where an elderly woman standing outside wouldn't draw attention. As I walked the 6 blocks to meet him, I could hear sirens in the distance. Police cars probably, called by a frantic family reporting their confused mother missing. Robert's car pulled up exactly 15 minutes later. I'd never been so happy to see anyone in my life. "Are you hurt?" he asked as I got in. "Just my pride, and possibly my knees. But Robert, I got it all, everything. Their plans to spend my money, their admission that the medical report is fake, their whole scheme laid out in detail. And they know you recorded them? They found the device after I escaped through the bathroom window." Robert started laughing again, the same genuine laughter I'd heard at the diner. "Eleanor, you are something else. Most people your age would have folded under that kind of pressure. Most people my age haven't spent 70 years dealing with difficult situations. And most people my age don't have 22 million reasons to fight back." We drove to Robert's office in comfortable silence, both of us processing what had just happened. My own son had tried to have me declared insane for money, but my granddaughter apologized with tears in her eyes when she learned the truth, and that gave me hope that not all of the damage was permanent. As we pulled into the parking lot of Chen and Associates, Robert handed me a tissue. "You're going to need to clean up before we review the recording. Tomorrow is going to be a very interesting day in court." "How interesting?" "Eleanor, with this recording, we're not just going to defeat their guardianship petition. We're going to expose them for what they really are. Predators who tried to use the legal system to steal from a vulnerable senior." I looked at myself in the passenger mirror, lipstick smeared, hair disheveled, dirt on my dress from my dramatic exit through the flower bed. I don't look much like a competent adult right now. You look like a 72-year-old woman who just escaped through a window to protect her independence and her life savings. Eleanor, you look like a hero. As we walked into his office to prepare for tomorrow's hearing, I realized something that would have shocked me just weeks ago. I felt more alive, more powerful, more in control than I had in years. My own son had tried to have me declared insane for money. But tomorrow, the judge was going to hear exactly what Brian and his family really thought about taking care of their elderly mother. And I had a feeling they weren't going to like how their words sounded in a courtroom. The courthouse lobby felt like a battlefield that morning. I arrived 30 minutes early with Robert, dressed in my best navy suit and carrying a briefcase that contained enough evidence to bury my family's fraudulent petition. We found a quiet corner where we could observe without being seen. Brian arrived at exactly 9 o'clock, flanked by his lawyer, a thin man in an expensive suit, who looked like he specialized in taking candy from babies. Patricia followed behind them, wearing black like she was already in mourning for my independence. Frank brought up the rear, carrying his familiar folder and wearing the expression of a man who thought he'd already won. They were laughing about something as they walked through the metal detectors, actually laughing like this was all just an amusing formality before they gained control of my bank accounts. "There's our client," Robert murmured, watching them scan the lobby. "They're looking for a confused old woman who doesn't know what's happening to her." "They're going to be disappointed," I replied. At 9:15, Judge Patricia Morrison called our case. The Honorable Patricia Morrison, a woman about my age who, according to Robert's research, had a reputation for taking elder abuse cases very seriously. Brian's lawyer stood up first, confident and smooth. "Your Honor, this is a straightforward matter of protecting a vulnerable senior from her own poor judgment. Mrs. Matthews has accumulated substantial wealth through questionable means and has demonstrated clear signs of cognitive decline and financial incompetence. Questionable means, they were now suggesting I'd acquired my fortune illegally." "Mr. Stevens," Judge Morrison said, "I've reviewed the medical report from Dr. Martinez. It's quite comprehensive for someone who never actually examined the alleged incapacitated person." The lawyer's confidence flickered slightly. "Your Honor, Mrs. Matthews failed to appear for her appointment due to confusion and disorientation." "Actually, Your Honor," Robert said, standing up, "Mrs. Matthews didn't appear because she recognized the appointment for what it was, an attempt to manufacture evidence for a fraudulent guardianship petition." The silence in the courtroom was deafening. Brian's face went white when he saw Robert in his attorney suit, briefcase in hand, looking every inch the legal professional he was. "And you are?" Judge Morrison asked. "Robert Chen, representing Mrs. Matthews. She's here today, competent and prepared to defend herself against what we believe is attempted elder financial abuse." I stood up from where I'd been sitting in the back row, and the look on my family's faces was worth every terrifying moment of the past few weeks. Patricia's mouth actually fell open. Frank dropped his folder, papers scattering across the floor. But it was Brian's expression that I'll never forget, a mixture of shock, fear, and something that looked almost like respect. For the first time in years, he was seeing me as something other than a problem to be managed. "Mrs. Matthews," Judge Morrison said, "please approach the bench." I walked down that courthouse aisle with my head high, my spine straight, and my mind crystal clear. This was my moment. "Mrs. Matthews, are you represented by counsel in this matter?" "Yes, Your Honor. Mr. Chen has been my attorney throughout this process." "And how do you respond to the allegations in this petition?" "Your Honor, I believe this petition represents a calculated attempt by my family to steal my life savings by having me declared incompetent. I have evidence that will prove their claims are not only false, but deliberately fraudulent." Judge Morrison turned to Brian's lawyer. "Mr. Stevens, your client indicated that Mrs. Matthews is unable to care for herself or make rational financial decisions. She appears quite articulate to me. Do you have any actual medical evidence of incapacity?" "Your Honor, we have Dr. Martinez's report." "The report based on an examination that never took place? That report?" Brian's lawyer suddenly asked for a continuance when I played the tapes. "Denied," Judge Morrison said firmly. "Mr. Chen, you mentioned evidence?" Robert walked to the front of the courtroom carrying a small digital recorder. "Your Honor, we have audio recordings of the petitioners discussing their true motivations for seeking guardianship. These recordings were made legally, with Mrs. Matthews' consent, during a family dinner just last night. He pressed play, and my family's voices filled the courtroom. Patricia's recorded voice was clear as a bell. Once we get guardianship, we can fix all her mistakes, move the money into better investments, start using it the way it should have been used all along. Then Brian. We'd set up an allowance, a monthly distribution. Something reasonable for your living expenses. We were thinking around $3,000 a month. And finally, Frank. $22 million sitting in conservative investments is a waste. With proper management, we could double that in 5 years. The silence that followed was profound. Judge Morrison's expression had shifted from professional interest to barely contained outrage. "Let me understand this correctly," she said, her voice deadly calm. "You filed a petition claiming Mrs. Matthews is financially incompetent, while simultaneously planning to give her a monthly allowance of $3,000 from her own $22 million estate." Brian's lawyer was scrambling through his papers like he might find a magic defense hidden in his briefcase. "Your Honor, families often need to make difficult decisions about asset management." "Mr. Stevens," the judge interrupted, "I'm going to save you some time. Not only is this petition denied, but I'm ordering an investigation into how Dr. Martinez came to write a competency report about a patient he never examined. I'm also referring this matter to the District Attorney's Office for possible charges of attempted elder financial abuse." She turned to my family, her voice cutting through the courtroom like a blade. "What you attempted here today was not family concern. It was elder abuse wrapped in legal paperwork. Mrs. Matthews has demonstrated financial acumen that most people would envy, turning modest savings into substantial wealth through decades of smart decisions. Your petition calls this evidence of mental incapacity, which suggests the only incompetent people in this courtroom are the ones who filed it." The gavel came down with finality. Case dismissed with prejudice. As we walked out of that courthouse, I could hear Brian trying to explain to his lawyer why their sure thing had just exploded in their faces. The court documents were public record now, which meant anyone could read about their attempted theft. And in a small town like ours, everyone would. By that afternoon, the story was all over social media. "Local family tries to steal millions from elderly mother" was trending on the community Facebook page. The newspaper picked it up by evening. "Guardianship fraud exposed in court" made the front page of the weekly edition. Brian lost his job at the bank within a week. Apparently, attempting to defraud an elderly relative doesn't inspire confidence in your financial ethics. Patricia's circle of tennis friends suddenly became very busy when she called. Frank had to close his consulting business when word spread about his role in the scheme. But the most important consequence came 3 days after the hearing, when my granddaughter Abigail showed up at my door with tears streaming down her face. "Grandma, I'm so sorry," she said, throwing her arms around me. "I didn't know what they were really planning. I thought you actually needed help." I held her close and felt something I hadn't felt in weeks: hope for our family's future. "They told me you were confused, that you weren't thinking clearly about money. But Grandma, you're the smartest person I know about money. You turned practically nothing into millions of dollars. How could anyone think that was a sign of being incompetent?" Out of the mouths of babes, the judge had called their petition a calculated attempt at elder financial abuse in open court. My own son had tried to have me declared insane for money, but the legal system had seen through their lies. Justice wasn't just served, it was served publicly, permanently, and with enough force to make sure they'd never try anything like this again. For the first time in months, I felt like myself again. Not a problem to be solved or a bank account to be raided, but a competent adult who'd just won the fight of her life. The first thing I did with my newfound freedom was buy myself a condo. Not a mansion, not some ostentatious display of wealth, but a beautiful 2-bedroom unit in a senior community with a view of the lake and neighbors who minded their own business. For the first time in my adult life, I was living somewhere that belonged completely to me, with no family history attached, no memories of being taken for granted, no ghosts of Sunday dinners where I cooked and cleaned while being treated like the help. Robert helped me transfer all my accounts to a new bank across town, one where Brian had no connections and no favors he could call in. We changed everything: checking, savings, investment portfolios. Every financial tie to my old life was severed with surgical precision. You don't have to disappear completely, Robert reminded me as we reviewed the new account paperwork. But you do have the right to control who has access to your life. He was right, of course, but for now, control meant distance. The phone calls started 3 days after I moved out. First Patricia, then Brian, then Frank. All of them suddenly very concerned about my hasty decisions and my emotional state after the court hearing. "Mom, we need to talk," Brian said when I finally answered on the 4th try. "This whole thing got out of hand. We were just trying to help. Just trying to help." The same words they'd used while planning to steal my life savings. "Brian, I want you to listen to me very carefully," I said, settling into my new armchair with my coffee and my view of the lake. "I am not angry with you. I don't hate you. But I am done being your mother in the way I used to be." "What does that mean?" "It means no more emergency loans, no more free meals every Sunday, no more babysitting while you vacation in Europe, no more pretending I'm poor so you can feel better about asking for money." The silence on the other end stretched so long I thought he'd hung up. "Mom, that's not... We never meant to take advantage." "Brian, stop. We both know exactly what you meant to do. The only difference is that now everyone else knows too." "So what? We're not family anymore? You're just cutting us out completely?" I took a sip of my coffee and watched a pair of ducks paddle across the lake. Such simple creatures with such simple needs: food, water, safety. No complicated family dynamics or financial schemes. "We're still family," I said finally. "But we're going to be family on very different terms. I'll be cordial when we see each other at holidays or family events. I'll always love Abigail, and she's welcome in my life any time she wants to be here. But I will never again be your ATM, your maid, or your emotional support system while you plot to steal my independence." I heard him take a shaky breath. "Mom, I'm sorry. We're all sorry. Can't we just start over?" "Starting over would require you to actually change, Brian. And change is hard work. So far, the only thing you've shown me is regret that you got caught." After I hung up, I sat in my quiet condo and realized something remarkable. I felt peaceful for the first time in years. No one was going to call asking for money. No one was going to drop by unexpectedly and expect me to cook dinner for 8 people. No one was going to make me feel guilty for having boundaries. It took 6 months for any real apologies to come. Frank was first, showing up at my door on a rainy Thursday afternoon, looking like he'd aged 5 years in 6 months. "Eleanor, I know you probably don't want to see me, but I needed to say something." I let him in, made coffee, and waited. "I lost everything," he said, staring into his cup. "My business, most of my friends, my reputation in this town, and I deserved it. What we tried to do to you, there's no excuse for it." "No, there isn't. The thing is, I've had a lot of time to think about why I went along with Brian's plan, and the truth is, I was jealous. Jealous that you'd done so well for yourself, while I'd made one bad decision after another. Jealous that you had choices, while I felt trapped by my failures." He looked up at me with eyes that reminded me of the brother I'd grown up with. before money and desperation had twisted him into someone I didn't recognize. "I got a job," he said. "Construction work, manual labor. First honest paycheck I've earned in years. It's not much, but it's mine." Frank actually got a job for the first time in years. Manual labor, which was probably the hardest work he'd done since high school. But there was something in his voice, something that sounded like pride. "I'm not asking for forgiveness," he continued. "I'm not asking for anything. I just wanted you to know that I understand what I did was wrong, and I'm trying to become the kind of person who would never do it again." I studied my brother's face, looking for signs of manipulation or self-pity, but all I saw was genuine remorse and the kind of exhaustion that comes from rebuilding your life from scratch. "I appreciate you telling me that, Frank, and I hope you succeed." He nodded and stood to leave. "Eleanor, for what it's worth, I always knew you were the smart one in this family. I should have been learning from you instead of plotting against you." Patricia never apologized. She moved to Florida 6 months after the court hearing, claiming she needed a fresh start, somewhere people didn't know her story. I heard through mutual acquaintances that she blamed me for destroying her family and overreacting to their well-intentioned plan. Some people never learn. Some people never change. But Brian surprised me. He showed up at Christmas, not at my condo, but at Abigail's college dorm, where I'd driven to take my granddaughter out for dinner. He looked thinner, more tired, but somehow more present than I'd seen him in years. "Mom," he said, standing awkwardly in the dormitory parking lot, while Abigail watched from the steps, "could we talk for a few minutes?" I looked at my granddaughter, who nodded encouragingly. Whatever Brian had to say, she'd already heard it. "I've been in therapy," he said without preamble, "since the trial, trying to understand how I became the kind of person who would try to steal from his own mother." This was not what I'd expected. The therapist says I have something called financial entitlement complex. Basically, I started thinking of your success as somehow belonging to me, like because I was your son, I had a right to your wealth. He kicked at a pile of dead leaves, looking younger than his 45 years. "I know saying I'm sorry doesn't fix anything. I know it doesn't undo the damage or make up for what I put you through. But I want you to know that I understand what I did was wrong. Not just legally wrong, but morally wrong. I tried to steal your independence, your dignity, your right to make your own choices." I waited, watching his face, looking for signs that this was another manipulation. But Brian had never been a good actor, and the pain in his voice seemed genuine. "I don't expect you to forgive me," he continued. "I don't expect anything from you anymore. But I wanted you to know that I'm trying to become someone worthy of being your son again. Someone who would protect you instead of trying to exploit you." He handed me a folded piece of paper. "This is a check for $40,000, the down payment you gave us for the house. I know it's not enough to make up for everything, but it's a start." I looked at the check, then at my son's face. "Brian, how did you get this money?" "We sold the house, downsized to a 2-bedroom apartment. Patricia hated it, which is part of why she left. But Abigail and I are doing fine. Better than fine, actually. Turns out living within our means is less stressful than constantly scrambling for more." Behind him, Abigail was crying, happy tears from the look of it. "Keep the money," I said, handing the check back. "Invest it in Abigail's future. But Brian, if you ever lie to me again, if you ever try to manipulate me or take advantage of me, we're done. Permanently." He nodded, tears in his eyes. "I understand." As I drove home from that Christmas dinner, I realized that something had shifted inside me. Not forgiveness exactly, but something like hope. Hope that families could heal without going back to the old patterns. Hope that boundaries could coexist with love. Hope that respect could be rebuilt on a foundation of honesty. My condo was quiet when I got home, but it was a good quiet, a peaceful quiet, the kind of quiet that comes from knowing you're safe in your own space, with your own choices, surrounded by people who treat you like a person instead of a resource to be exploited. For the first time in my adult life, I was truly free. It's been 18 months since that night I crawled through a bathroom window to escape my own family's greed. As I sit here in my sunroom, watching the morning light dance across the lake while I write this story, I can honestly say I've never been happier. Robert and I have coffee every Tuesday at Miller's Diner, the same booth where he first explained how to fight back against people who would steal your independence. We've become more than friends. We've become partners in a small but important mission. Chen & Associates now specializes exclusively in elder abuse cases, and I've become their unofficial consultant on family financial exploitation. Last month, we helped a 78-year-old woman whose son was forging her signature on Social Security checks. 3 weeks ago, we stopped a guardianship petition filed by a daughter who wanted to sell her father's house to pay her gambling debts. These cases are everywhere once you know what to look for. Yesterday, Abigail graduated from college with honors, a degree she paid for herself through scholarships, part-time work, and student loans. She refused my offer to help, saying she wanted to earn her education the way her grandmother had earned her fortune. I've never been prouder of anyone in my life. Brian and I have dinner once a month now, sometimes with Abigail, sometimes just the two of us. We talk about books, current events, his job at the credit union where he's slowly rebuilding his reputation. We don't talk about money unless he brings it up, and he rarely does. Our relationship isn't what it used to be, but it's built on respect now instead of exploitation. Frank sends me a Christmas card every year from his small apartment across town. He's still doing construction work, still living within his means, still paying for his mistakes. We'll never be close again, but I respect the man he's trying to become. Patricia remarried in Florida. Her new husband is apparently wealthy enough to fund her lifestyle without needing to steal from elderly relatives. I wish them both well from a safe distance. The money, it's still mine, all of it. I donate generously to causes I believe in, travel when I want to, and yes, I even splurge occasionally on things that make me happy. Last week, I bought a ridiculously expensive espresso machine, just because I wanted one. At 74, I've finally learned that it's okay to spend money on yourself when it's your money to spend. But here's what I really want you to understand, especially if you're listening to this while you're doing dishes for people who don't appreciate you, or driving home from a family dinner where you felt invisible, or lying awake, wondering why you always give more than you receive. You don't owe anyone your dignity. You don't owe them your money, your labor, your silence, or your compliance when they're treating you poorly. Family members who truly love you don't need to threaten legal action to get your cooperation. People who respect you don't call you crazy for protecting your own interests. If someone in your life is telling you that setting boundaries makes you selfish, that protecting your assets makes you greedy, that saying no makes you mentally incompetent, they're lying, they're manipulating you, and you deserve better. I spent 5 years being my family's personal ATM, an unpaid servant, because I thought that's what good mothers do. I was wrong. Good mothers teach their children to be independent, responsible, and respectful. Good families support each other without exploitation or coercion. At 72, I learned that it's never too late to demand the respect you've always deserved. At 74, I'm living proof that standing up for yourself, even when it's scary, even when people call you crazy, even when you have to crawl through windows to escape, is always worth it. If my story has taught you anything, I hope it's this. Your life belongs to you. Your money belongs to you. Your choices belong to you. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise, no matter how much they claim to love you. And if they try to take those things away from you through legal manipulation or emotional blackmail, remember that there are people like Robert out there, lawyers who specialize in protecting seniors from financial abuse, advocates who will stand with you, resources that can help you fight back. You are not powerless. You are not crazy. You are not selfish for protecting what you've worked your whole life to build. You are worthy of respect, dignity, and the right to live your life on your own terms. At 74, I finally learned what it meant to live for myself. It's never too late to start.